Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN Sunday. I'll be joined today by members of the media, financial services, and academia as we analyze all the news and information this week in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Well, let's kick things off with a look at personal finance. And joining us on the line, she's a personal finance reporter with The Motley Fool. She writes a tremendous amount of copy each and every week, filling readers with a lot of great information. We're very privileged to have on this program again, Mari Backman. Mari, Happy New Year. Great to speak with you. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. Wow, that was quite the intro. I hope
I'm out of breath.
To it, Jeff.
I'm out of breath. But no, you
Yeah.
you deserve it. I mean, I think people, for all the contributors on these programs, first of all, they're unpaid. They donate their time, and they have real jobs in which they write a lot, both in print, but also online, digital, social media, etc. So we are very privileged to have you, and you, of course, always live up to it. So let's talk about taxation, because we're entering a new year. Taxes typically are due April 15th. So
Exactly.
what's the latest skinny?
Exactly. So taxes are still due April 15th, and I don't want people to get confused about that, because last year the IRS actually pushed the tax filing deadline back 3 months to July 15th in response to the pandemic. And when you think about it, that's understandable, because the pandemic, for all intents and purposes, broke, quote unquote, in the U.S. around early mid-March. And, to be fair, that's really the time when a lot of people start working on their taxes, and that's not necessarily an irresponsible thing to do. I often don't start my taxes till the March, time frame, because I don't always have all my forms, and being self-employed, there's a lot to get together, like a lot of documents to get together and gather. So, the IRS was good enough to extend the deadline last year, just when the world basically exploded or imploded or whatever we want to call it. This year, as of right now, we're not getting any sort of leeway. So taxes are due April 15th. What is different this year also, though, is that the IRS has delayed the start of the tax filing season. So normally you can first submit a tax return somewhere in the vicinity of late January. And this year, the IRS has actually pushed that date back to February 12th. So what that means is that those early birds who like to get in there and file their taxes as quickly as possible because they know they're due a refund, those people are going to have to wait a couple of weeks and file their taxes mid-February.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you. Just a first question I had is this a result of a new administration? Is this the result of COVID, or is this the result of maybe cash flow? Because those early filers typically get a refund. Maybe it's a combination of all three. Just wanted to see, and maybe you were going to go to that next, so I apologize, but I was just wondering if there any rationale as to why.
Nope, no need to be sorry at all. No, it's not really an administration thing, because, especially what with technically the administration just switchover just took place extremely recently. It's actually, I think, more a matter, and it's not a cash flow thing either. It's more a matter of, the IRS has been really focused over the last few weeks trying to get those stimulus payments out, those $600 stimulus payments that were approved at the end of December. Mm-hmm. So I think the agency is just trying to kind of buy itself a little bit of time to process returns. The other thing is that as of December, and I don't know exactly where things stand right now because we're already into late January, but as of December, the IRS was sitting on an estimated 1 million unprocessed paper tax returns. So, Jeff, when you file your taxes, you have two options. You can use software and file it electronically, which is what's usually recommended because it's easier, it's quicker, it reduces your chances of making an error, you get your refund faster. But there are some people who like to keep it old school. They like to sit there and fill out that paper return, and normally that's fine. But here's the problem. Paper returns have to be manually looked through and processed. So last year, all the people who sent in their paper returns, those returns landed in a physical IRS office. Problem was that a lot of IRS employees were working from home last year due to the pandemic. So the IRS has had this huge backlog of tax returns that it still needed to go through as of December. And I don't know how much headway it's made as of now, but I think also the agency wanted to buy itself a little bit of time to catch up on those, knowing full well that there are still going to be those people this year who continue to file a paper return.
Yeah, and this is all completely understandable, because everything doesn't just happen on a dime, and we've had to adjust all of our business practices, whether it's government or private sector or not-for-profit. Mari, what should people who are typically are those early birds? They're beta breath. Maybe they do a 1040 EZ. Maybe they do the traditional 1040, but they've got it all done. I mean, are there things that they should be thinking about or doing in anticipation with bated breath of that February open date?
I mean, basically, just if you think you'll be ready to file by then, get everything in order, and prepare to just do it that day. Because, if you file an electronic return, most of the time the IRS is able to generate your refund within 3 weeks. If you sign up for direct deposit, sometimes you'll get your money even sooner than that. So if you really are anxious to get that money back, I'd say file as early as possible and definitely file electronically. If you file a paper return, on a normal year, Jeff, the IRS usually takes about 6 weeks to issue your refund. But this is not a normal year because, like I said, the IRS is still catching up on those, and the IRS is still probably short-staffed in its actual offices, which means that incoming paper returns are likely to be delayed too. So I highly recommend that anybody who wants a refund quickly file in February and file electronically. Not only that, check those bank account details. It's pretty common, Jeff, for people to enter the wrong bank account information. You swap an account number or the routing number's off. Here's the thing. The IRS is not going to go investigate and try to figure out what your correct bank account is. Here's what's going to happen. The IRS is going to send a payment to this incorrect account. The bank is going to, generally what will happen is the bank is going to reject that payment because something doesn't match up, right? The name's wrong or something's wrong. So the bank is going to bounce that payment back to the IRS. The IRS is going to get the funds back, but then they're going to issue a check. They're not going to go after a tax filer, and say, oh, hey, Bob, you gave us the wrong bank account information. Could you update that for us, buddy? No, it doesn't have the bandwidth to do that, and a lot of the refund processing is so automated anyway that just wouldn't make sense. So basically, if you put in the wrong bank account details in an attempt to expedite your refund, you've signed up for direct deposit, you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot and having to wait even longer. So, it's important to obviously check all of the details of your tax return, check to make sure you put in the right Social Security number, et cetera, but definitely check those bank account details. People, Jeff, we mentioned in passing those stimulus payments.
Yep.
People are also not getting their stimulus payments for the same reason. If the IRS has incorrect bank account details on file, those stimulus payments are also getting bounced, and then the IRS has to wait to get those funds back, and then it can issue a check or a debit card, and people are having to wait on their stimulus money. So just the overall lesson is just take an extra minute to verify that those numbers.
And Mari, you kind of said it about validating, but I've been seeing COVID scams. I do a newsletter every morning and look at a lot of different copy, a lot of different articles. COVID scams, stimulus scams. People really, 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 really need to validate their credentials and their information to make sure that they have it correct, because it's really hard if you send a financial transaction electronically to someone or to an account that is not yours, really hard to get it back.
Yeah, usually it comes back if it's not fraud, if it's just a genuine mistake.
Mm-hmm.
That it's actually not so hard to get it back. When it's fraud, it's a little bit different. There is a lot of fraud. Look, there's tax fraud, there's stimulus fraud. As far as that goes, thankfully the IRS has been really quick to get those $600 payments out. And I would say that anyone who's expecting one of those payments, and maybe by mail or check, debit card, and doesn't get it soon, should definitely look at claiming that stimulus as a refund on their tax return. What you're also going to see happening, though, is people are always going to get these spam calls, these emails, these text messages saying we have a problem with your bank account. You need to call us and verify your bank account, or you need to give us your bank account information. You need give us your password and give us this, that, and just don't do that, because the IRS does not reach out to people individually doing things like that by text or by email. It's not how the agency works. If you're going to get correspondence from the IRS, it's going to be a letter in the mail on official letterhead. And it's not to say that scammers can't attempt to replicate that either, but if you get a text or if you get a random phone call or email, it's more likely a scam. That's just sort of the general rule.
Well, really good information. Mari, pleasure talking with you as always. We cannot, there's so much information, it's hard to fill it up in a 7 to 10 minute segment, but look, you do it. So thanks so much for joining us on the program. We look forward to having you back in a few weeks. And until then, we'll read you every day as we always do.
Thanks, Jeff. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Welcome back. Time to talk tech. And joining us online, he's lead advisor and executive producer for 7 Investing, Mr. Daniel Klein. Dan, great to talk with you as always. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Okay, Dan. I know there's so much going on in the tech world. We had CES. We've now got a store, healthcare, tech, etc. But I know you want to talk Netflix because they reached a milestone recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So Netflix has hit 200 million subscribers. That's really impressive as they first hit 100 million subscribers in 2017. They've also gotten, let's call it pretty close to cash flow positive, and they've made it clear that they're not going to need to raise outside money again. These are really strong things, but Jeff, it doesn't really change my investing thesis on Netflix.
So, okay, Dan, 200 million subscribers. Can I ask you, where are most of these subscribers located? Are they here in the U.S., UK, Europe? Where
So I don't have the exact breakdown in front of me, but it's global. It's about 80 million US, maybe a little bit more than that. So they do have a massive global presence, way ahead of anybody else in terms of their penetration in the rest of the world. Pretty much any place except China.
Yeah. Now, Dan, I want to go back to your thesis, and we don't offer financial advice, but I want to get or guidance. We just offer education, but I want to get your thoughts around why this may or may not be a good long-term investment. I'll just give you my point of view as a layperson, not a financial analyst. Is that have they reached a saturation point, and is there a lot more upside to glean? So I'll let you kick us off there.
So I do think there's upside. And I think if you want to say a long-term investment, think of it like a Costco. This is never going to be a company that throws off a ton of cash, and it's really sexy and it's subscription-based. That being said, they can only cut their spend so much. And this is kind of what I don't like about Netflix and why I do think it's riskier than people think it is, even though they could get to 250 million. Hell, they could get to 300 million subscribers.
Yeah.
They could raise prices, but everything they've promised to do with content is every reason I'm wary about the stock. They're releasing a new movie every week for the entire year. That's like 48 movies you've never heard of, one with The Rock, one with Sandra Bullock, one with Adam Sandler, one with, Ryan Reynolds. It is so much money being spent on content nobody's going to watch. And I'll give you the counter to this. And I know there's hit shows on Netflix, the Bridgerton and the ones with the Queen, but they're producing 50 shows for every hit, and maybe 5 or 6 other of those are demographic or local or regional hits, but they have to throw so much at the wall. Whereas Disney Plus put out their new show for January, February. There's some ancillary things, but their big budget new show for 2 months is WandaVision. Every person I know has at least given that a try. And they only had to do one show. Doesn't matter if they spent $80 million on it. Netflix spent $80 million on a movie you've never heard of starring David Spade. I mean, I'm teasing a little bit, but that's what they're doing. So the content spend is astronomical, and they don't have intellectual property that matters. When they say we're going to spend $200 million on a movie that's kind of like James Bond, that sort of points out they don't have James Bond. What should Netflix be doing? They should be looking at what content is out there that's a name brand and seeing if they can buy it. They've made some mistakes. They let Comcast acquire DreamWorks. That would have been a good pickup for them. They let CBS move forward when they would have been really good partners. Instead, you have all those properties going to die on Paramount Plus, which are now CBS All Access. Star Trek and some of the lesser properties there, Twilight Zone. If I was them, I'd be identifying every property that could be purchased. And if you had to pay $2 billion for James Bond, I'd rather you put out a James Bond movie once a year than 10 movies that are kind of like James Bond. It doesn't make any sense. It's a bad content strategy. Intellectual property matters, and Netflix is basically buying up creators. Yeah, I don't think creators are the brand. Are you going to watch the new Loki television show? Or are you going to watch whatever Shonda Rhimes does when no one's pushing back? And that's the problem. You get all these self-indulgent. I know people like that show, but to me, it's not that appealing. And the only reason I have Netflix is because I live in a house with other people and T-Mobile pays for most of it. For the most part, there's nothing on Netflix that appeals to me. It all seems like very self-indulgent, very quickly produced, and I get it. There's good shows. I'd probably like Ozark, my wife says.
Oh, that was a good show.
But I know I'm gonna like WandaVision. I know I'm gonna like whatever. They could spin off Baby Yoda's flying baby cart thing, and I'd watch that show. Like so, and I recognize I'm a different demographic, but Netflix is trying to appeal to everybody, and really, like, you know what I'm not watching? The Floor is Lava, like, or British People Bake a Cake. Like, there's just too much garbage and not enough event programming, and producing garbage is pretty expensive.
Yeah, definitely. And I have to say, I'm in agreement with you in terms of some of the stuff that Netflix is producing. I don't see it as a good long term strategy because quality, in my estimation, quality matters. And I think that's where Disney really kind of exceeds that. Dan, the other story, I know you wanted to talk about human flight in space and SpaceX. Kind of a weird transition there from, well, I mean, I'm sure they do have human flight, and I think they have some stuff about the Apollo landings and other documentaries on Netflix. But let's talk about SpaceX because I think that's kind of cool. Something we don't normally, it's not fintech, it's not health tech, it's not wealth tech, but I think it's kind of cool to discuss.
Yeah, so it's actually a direct link because SpaceX is launching satellites that, in theory, will bring internet to places that don't have it, and eventually bring an option for internet for places that do have it. And it's very cool. And someday that might be how you get your Netflix, especially if you live someplace where you just don't have access. Or when we first had a place in West Palm Beach, my building was switching providers, and for about a year, the internet provider simply wouldn't log on new customers. So my only options were a satellite internet where I physically got a satellite. The SpaceX Starlink technology is going to be just satellite internet that works like your cell phone. It's just going to be out there. My question about it, Jeff, and I think it's a really important one, is how fast is it going to be? And the reality is, I don't think it's going to be better as an option for most people than high-end 5G, or dare we say 6G. So by the time this is fully deployed, I actually think it might be unnecessary because if you look at what you can do on 5G, and there are points in West Palm Beach that have true 5G, and it's lightning fast on my iPhone. Now, would it work for broadcasting? Probably not. But here's the reality: most people don't broadcast from their basement. Most people want to have a good experience watching a movie. They're even willing to have a little bit of buffering or load time at the beginning. You know, they want their email to go through. They want to be able to Google stuff. And I actually think that connection is much more likely to come through your phone, even in rural areas, than it is through a satellite. So I love what they're doing. I love the mission, but you can't get tens of thousands of satellites in the air quickly. And by the time they're ready to go in a couple of years, I think their market's going to be smaller. And I recognize that's, you say anything about an Elon Musk company and people come at you. It's a great idea. I think globally there's a lot of potential for it. In the US, I'm not entirely sure it's necessary.
Yeah, well, we have been talking about rural access to the internet. So those are schools, children, hospitals, businesses, etc. So that sounds very positive to me, Dan. Um, we need to get people around this country and in other areas of the world. I mean, I'm not just talking U.S., but I am thinking about the U.S. in particular because we've talked about it. We've got to get them access to this technology. And I think this is a way to do that. And we've also talked about healthcare not being accessible. Maybe not necessarily in your segment, maybe in some other segments. But again, easily launching satellites into space at a low cost with a reusable spaceship is going to help get us there, I think.
It's going to be part of the solution. I don't think it's going to be big business because the reality is rural areas aren't served by internet because it's not profitable. Now, that being said, it might make sense, I don't, with a satellite to cover this. But again, eventually you're going to get 5G and 6G in pretty much the entire country. There are very few places that don't have 3G and 4G access right now. So I look at this a bit like satellite television. For a decade, maybe longer, satellite television was a viable alternative to cable. It was the only one, and that helped Dish and DirecTV grow. Over the past couple of years, the internet and streaming television has made that absolutely unnecessary. Why would you depend on a satellite that, if it rains out or it's windy, you might lose your connection, where you're much less likely to lose your internet connection? I think that's likely what's going to happen to space internet, though it will be viable in countries that don't have the infrastructure. It'll be useful at situations like the Super Bowl, where all of a sudden an area needs twice the internet connectivity that it had previously. There's going to be uses for this, but I'm very wary of it as a big business.
Well, Dan, I have to say that this segment and your segment in particular are always out of this world. And really, there you go. You like that? I like that reference. Really appreciate you coming on. And the great thing about having you on, Dan, is that we get to talk twice a week. So we look forward to having you back on the program again on Tuesday, my friend.
I'll see you Tuesday.
Thanks, buddy. Welcome back. And now time to talk about real estate and travel. Joining us on the line is Jacob Passy. He covers both items for Dow Jones Market Watch. Jacob, pleasure to chat with you as always. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So, I mentioned you cover both travel and real estate, but what's top of mind this week? Because we had the inauguration early in the week. Did that have any effect? I would think that you wrote a lot about real estate potentially, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. This is your opportunity to tell us what's important.
Yeah, so Biden wasted no time and has already taken steps to protect renters further, and has made pretty significant proposals as part of his stimulus plan that would help the housing market. So right off the bat, one of the first executive actions he took after he was sworn in on Wednesday was to request the CDC to extend the nationwide eviction moratorium until the end of March. And the CDC immediately complied. So before that, Congress in the stimulus package they passed back in December had extended the moratorium until the end of January. But that's that was coming up pretty quickly, and the good thing about the December package was it did include billions of dollars in emergency rental assistance, but it took some time for that money to be distributed, and it's still in the process of being distributed. So a lot of folks, renters, landlords, haven't gotten that money yet. So it was pretty important to have the moratorium extended so that those funds could get to other people. But Biden has, proposed going, even, a few steps further. He's called on Congress to pass, legislation as part of its, pass the stimulus package. And as part of that, he wants to see the eviction moratorium extended all the way till the end of September. He didn't take that action himself. He's leaving that to Congress for now. But he wants it to be even longer. And then he wants more money to be passed for emergency rental assistance. Only $25 billion was passed in the first stimulus package in December, and that was well short of what folks said was needed. The kind of minimum that folks, both housing advocates and even rental industry groups, said around $100 billion was needed in rental assistance to help get people back on track with their rent, cover back rent, things like that. So he's called for that, and he's also called for changes to be made to the moratorium. I think you and I have talked about this, but there advocates have argued that there were gaps in it that were leaving renters unprotected, and there was no serious enforcement mechanism of it. It was left up to state and local leaders to enforce, and in some parts of the country it's not been enforced, so people are still being evicted even though they should ostensibly be protected by the moratorium. So Biden's kind of called for lawmakers to, in their stimulus legislation, close some of those gaps. Also do things like, create, assistance for folks so that they, can get, if they can't afford a lawyer or something and they're a renter, that they can get one, get funds for one, if they do end up going to housing court and things like that. So, he's wasting no time and is, looking to improve the situation in the rental market right now.
Thanks, Jacob. And what about the flip side? I mean, you mentioned some of the stimulus support for the industry being below what many experts on all sides said was necessary. What about landlords? Are they featured in the stimulus in terms of getting some level of support, maybe delay in tax because they have to file taxes too? Anything you're hearing there in terms of supporting the landlords, many of whom, as you've told us, are small businesses, right? They're mom and pops. They're like these little. They may have one or two or three properties.
Yeah, so nothing tax-wise so far, although I wouldn't be surprised if we did see that. Obviously, the concern for landlords isn't just, federal taxes, but also state and local taxes.
Yep.
But in terms of, the financial assistance other than, tax relief, that is somewhat left up to states. States are the ones who receive the funds from the federal government, and then they basically have to create their own programs to distribute them. And in some cases, landlords can apply themselves to get those funds, rather than typically what happens is the renter or the tenant would apply for, their what they owe in rent from whatever agency is identified by the state they live in to distribute those funds. But in some cases, states are also creating avenues for landlords to seek this. One issue there, though, that advocates are worried about is, making sure that when landlords do that they don't then go ahead and still evict those tenants.
Yeah.
If they are requesting the funds, advocates want to make sure that they are still protected and that they also, notify their tenant that they requested, this assistance on their behalf. And so that is something that, we'll have to see, how states handle that. There likely will be, court cases involving that. And that could also be, an element of whatever is passed at the federal level. But there are major concerns right now. The moratorium keeps going on. The moratorium was in place for many, many months before there was any, real form of housing assistance passed. And landlords are struggling. And so far, we haven't seen, a wave of foreclosures because of, the coronavirus. But most people I speak to say that's only kind of a matter of time. It's not clear how many we'll see. I think the hope right now is that with, and this is true also of homeowners themselves, not just landlords, but, I think the idea is that, hopefully this assistance as it filters through will support people and get them back on track. And we won't see too many, but it's likely that, after many, many months of missed payments, it's reasonable to assume some landlords will go out of business. And it's not clear what's going to happen, to those properties. And there's risks to tenants. Let's say you live in an apartment building and a lot of your neighbors haven't been able to pay their rent. And the landlord, files for foreclosure or it's foreclosed against or files for bankruptcy, your housing situation might be in jeopardy then, even if you've been paying your rent every month. So, and that's a situation that played out a lot during the Great Recession. So still not clear what's going to happen, but definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as this pandemic continues unabated, I mean, it is, now we're getting viruses, but this is an important part. If you don't have a home, then what happens? And many of America's homeless, I think we've talked about on the show with you and others that there are many homeless Americans who do not have. In fact, last week I think we talked about it with you. There are many homeless Americans that don't have a place to go, not even a shelter. So a lot of work to be done there. Jacob, I want to ask you what's going on in the housing market. But we've talked about it week after week after week after week, month after month, that there's been a drought in terms of supply. So what's happening there?
Yeah, it's still the case. Just on Friday, the National Association of Realtors released their monthly existing home sales report. So this was for December. They do it for the previous month. And inventory dropped to another record low. They measure, the common way folks measure it is in terms of months supply. So there was, at the end of December, there was 1.9 months supply of homes for sale. And a balanced market is for a market to be balanced, the target is 6 months supply of homes. So, this situation's not getting any better anytime soon. The good thing is that we are seeing home building activity, is still remaining elevated. The number of permits issued in December for new homes to be built was at the highest level since 2006. So that's good. That's good news. And as those homes come on the market, not only does that provide inventory in general, but to the extent that those homes might be nicer, might be larger, et cetera, you might see some existing homeowners choose to upgrade to a new home, which could free up some of the entry-level homes that are sorely needed across the country. So, it's not clear yet what's going to happen. The market right now is in a little bit of a lull. Activity was still high, increased in December and was still high year over year. But, when you look at like the data for mortgage applications, that's dropped off quite a bit since, the peak this summer. And some of that seasonality, this time of year, things slow down in general. It's, most folks would prefer to move, in the summer, especially folks with children want to not move at a time that would disrupt, the school year, forcing kids to move to a new school, potentially, things like that. So, we're waiting, folks are probably waiting on the sidelines a bit, but the rise in COVID cases is also probably having an effect. And, I think that a lot of folks are hunkering down. We have the new variants that are spreading and things like that. So there's probably a lot of people who are, probably thinking to themselves, I'll wait and get vaccinated before I, am touring homes and things like that. So,
yeah.
And even when they go to tour homes, not clear that there's going to be much for them to buy.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it certainly sounds like I want to be optimistic, but that things will eventually return back to normal. Lots of change going on. I guess we're going to see how this all plays out over the next couple of years, but most importantly over the next 100 days, which is typically the benchmark by which all administrations, I guess, are at least initially measured. Well, Jacob, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, my friend. I want to wish you a very happy rest of the weekend. Enjoy the, hopefully it's nice weather where you are, and we look forward to catching up with you again next week.
Yeah, talk soon.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now time to talk markets, or maybe what some of the top themes for the markets for the week were. Joining us on the line, he is the lead anchor for the TD Ameritrade Network. You can find him kind of bookends the programming in Morning Trade Live and Markets on the Close. I'm talking about Oliver Rennick. Oliver, great to talk with you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. As always, appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so short week because of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, but we have a new president, and wanted to get your sense for do we have a new market? Have things changed? What is your perspective for the week? So, what are your top three themes of the week?
So the big thing this week that's number one, which is kind of ironic the way you phrased it, hey, we've got a new president, are there any new themes? The market this week just basically hit a wall in terms of its main kind of themes over the last couple months. As your listeners will know, if they've been listening to kind of my description of the market, it's been this bifurcating market back and forth. And sometimes you get a market that's very much about quarantine and another market that's very much about reopening. Now, for the most part, over the last 3 months, or I should be more specific, since September, reopening has been the dominant force in the market. But this week it just stopped, and it's pretty bizarre, especially when considering that the Biden administration has been associated with stimulating the economy and helping with that recovery theme. All that just got stopped in its tracks. And this week we had a huge reversal back into tech stocks, mega cap FANG companies, and a decline in the economically sensitive parts of the market. So it's really interesting. I don't really know, honestly, what to make of it entirely. But that sudden stop in this optimism from the market is interesting. Obviously, we have COVID cases that are near record, but they're declining. And this week, the declines became quite pronounced. Case count is going down across the nation. We have problems in the employment situation, as we've seen over the past month still, but this week our data beat expectations. So it's odd that against that backdrop, investors suddenly expressed a great deal of anxiety about the economy and chose to hide out in these kind of new tech safety trades, if you will. So part of that was because Netflix had a really big earnings and investors just started piling into Apple and big tech again, but it went further than that. And it was a pretty broad shift in the market narrative. And that to me is a little bit puzzling, given the news flow. And I guess we'll just wait to see if it follows through next week.
Yeah, I mean, you have to get, just as an aside, Oliver, and you're a student of the markets, I will say. You love it. You're passionate about it. I mean, you got to kind of get whiplash. It's almost like watching a match at Wimbledon or something, or the U.S. Open here in the States, right? I mean, you're going back and forth. You're watching what is happening. You're seeing the news flow. Sometimes things don't always correlate to a good serve or a good volley. Obviously you can't measure anything over a few days. I mean, we had a president. We're recording this on Friday afternoon at 12:30 your time, 12:40 your time. The president has only been the president for less than 48 hours, right? So I mean, I don't think you can throw that on his shoulders. But it's very interesting to see how there's a cyclical rotation, or however you describe it, back to these FANG and tech stocks. It kind of boggles the mind. I mean, are people that pessimistic? Are the bears out crying or whatever, howling? Maybe that's what they do. Any sense for,
right.
Am I making any sense?
Yeah, I mean, that is really this bizarre situation where you have a market that is getting really, really kind of frothy and bubbly in some areas, but those areas are not the ones that generally are associated with the direction we're going, which is towards recovery. So the bear case at this point, I mean, they are wailing. It is the NASDAQ looks like technically it's breaking out. The NASDAQ looks like, if you would just wake up and look at this chart from a technical perspective, you would probably describe it as a breakout and getting ready for more gains. It's my opinion that the news flow does not fit with what has been positive for the NASDAQ over the last 5 months or last year. And so I have trouble describing, kind of reconciling that technical breakout with the fundamentals behind it. But at the same time, there's just so much speculation happening today. As we talk, GameStop, a company that people thought was going bankrupt, 3 months ago or 6 months ago, is up at the highest in a decade almost, and is up 30%, 50%, 70% as the day goes on.
Yeah.
So it's just nuts. There's a lot of things that are making it very hard to stay kind of tethered to a fully accurate narrative. And obviously that happens, right? We never know exactly why things happen in markets. But generally speaking, when these type of glaring discrepancies arise, they tend to resolve themselves in one way or another.
Oliver, you bring up Netflix, and just want to get your, you're not necessarily a stock analyst, but you're you cover this on a regular basis. You brought them up. 200 million subscribers. I'd love to have 200 million subscribers. I'd love to have 10 million subscribers. But what do you make of that them reaching that? That's got to be good for them. But does there become a reality where you can only produce so much content? There's only so many people in the world who can afford to get Netflix. Can they go up to 1 billion? I mean, is that really realistic? I mean, what do you take from all that when you're looking at a tech stock like Netflix, or a media stock like Netflix?
Well, that to me is kind of the hang-up right now. Is companies are dominant, fantastic in providing services and products for which there is an enormous amount of demand, but logically to me it is impossible not to think that some of that demand has been pushed forward. So let's say there's a total addressable market where Netflix can have, a seventh of the population. Let's say they can get 1 billion people in the world on their platform. I'm not really disputing that. What I would take issue with is that the rate at which they added people over the last year is going to continue once life gets back to normal. To me, that's very difficult to see, given how unique the circumstances were of our world the last year that pushed forward this demand. So that applies not just for Netflix, but really I think any company that saw a sales growth rate above its, 5-year average or some period of time, but above their average rate compared to pre-COVID, those companies have probably pushed forward some demand. And by that logic, you would expect the market to pay less for these companies if their growth rate is slowing. That's basically the bear case for the NASDAQ. It's the bear case I've offered up in our narrative for 4 months now, since September. It looked pretty brilliant in September. It looked pretty good in October again. Looks good after the vaccine, but this past month and a half is basically just totally, blown that view out of the water. And I do believe, though, it's because our COVID cases surged again. So I think that if we hadn't had that big third wave again during the winter, we would probably be seeing a NASDAQ still struggling to make new highs and the overall rotation happening at a much quicker clip. But instead, investors have run right back to those tech quarantine trades. But the logic to me is that it really should not last too long after quarantine.
Well, I still put you in the brilliant category, Oliver, and I think fans and people who listen to you, who watch, they should check you out. Morning Trade
You're
Live.
very generous.
Well, it's fitting. They should check you out on Morning Trade Live and Markets on the Close on the TD Ameritrade Network. You can look it up or find it on your channels. Oliver, great to talk with you. As always, take care. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, later, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now time to check in with our legal Eagles. Lots going on in Washington, D.C. these days. And joining me on the line, Kevin Walsh, David Levine. Both are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm, based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, great to see you, or hear you at least. Thanks for joining us this morning.
It's great to be on, Jeff. We always enjoy being on the show, but I think today's special because, the country's headed in a different direction today. So I think there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. David, you want to kick things off?
Well, I got to say, Kevin, you say that like different is good. Different is different. We're the Eagles. We maintain neutrality in this process. We complain no matter which administration is in power. That's the first starting point. We need to make it clear for everybody. Whether Democrat, Republican...
David, I didn't say a bright new day for America. I didn't say, the sky is falling. I said it's a different day. I think, there's going to be changes, and I think we'll start seeing them.
Yes, well, you talked about unity and carnage in the same sentence. I don't even know which way you're going. But anyway.
This is one of my favorite parts of the show because the banter back and forth. I could just sit back and listen. I can be an audience member. Sorry, David, go ahead.
All right, so let's really jump in. No, Jeff, you saved us from ourselves, so thank you. Obviously, as of now, this is recorded the day after the inauguration. We have President Biden. So President Biden dove in yesterday with a stack of executive orders. There's a bunch more coming today on COVID. What does all mean for the retirement space? Kevin's going to talk about the regulatory side, but let's talk about the Hill a little bit. The Hill, as we talked a lot before the end of the year, right now we have Secure 2.0 that Richie Neal and Ranking Member Brady, are both in favor of. So the House has legislation that would really be another sort of Christmas tree bill like Secure, things like 403B activities and a whole bunch of expansion of coverage.
David,
David, what?
Much like we're a nonpartisan duo, we're also a non-denominational duo. So that Christmas tree reference there has me a little bit uncomfortable.
Fine. It's a, fine. It is a holiday gift bill. There we go. Happy holidays to you too, Kevin. And similarly, on the Senate side, we have the Retirement Security and Savings Act. We're going to see, now that we have Democratic control of the Senate, barely, where there's still some power sharing and all the details as of this recording are still not worked out. We would expect that retirement, that we would see something like Secure 2.0, Senators Portman and Cardin's bill get sort of woven in, and maybe there's agreement just to pick up the House version, or maybe that there's sort of two different paths and they start weaving through together, and maybe even we go to conference committee on two different bills that are close, and maybe even see if we can get like some legislation that goes through the normal order of legislation. We've walked through those items. There's one or two small hiccups. There's this thing called an impeachment trial that could consume some time in the Senate at this point, but we will see. It definitely seems like the momentum is there. If unity, everybody getting along is a theme, retirement savings is top of list and a top priority for many in Congress, so it can move forward. But I think the bigger news, of course, is what's going to happen on regulation. I know the Biden administration already said one of their priorities relates to benefits, But rather than take Kevin's thunder, I'll hand it to him.
Kevin.
Thanks, David. That was great, and at times it was informative.
These guys need their own show.
It's okay, but it's okay, Kevin. I promise to restate what you're going to say in the next 20 minutes and two, so we're good.
So you did a great job, but I thought one of the key points that I would have made if I was talking about the legislative front is that based on the idea of unity, that the retirement space really is one area where we've seen unity in the past with Secure 1.0, and Secure 2.0 really could be an opportunity for Biden and the Congress to work together to show that.
Kevin, I already said this. You're consuming time here. Kevin,
okay, so
you just reworded what I said.
Pinging to the regulatory front. I just said it better. Pinging to the regulatory front. I said it my way, much like the takeoff tune yesterday.
Touche. I knew I set you up for that one. All right, Jeff, whenever we're going to get to regulation, because Kevin clearly doesn't want to get there. So
I love this debate. Go ahead, Kevin.
On the regulatory front, yesterday, President Biden issued a number of executive orders. One of them rattled off a whole host of regulations that he wants his agencies to review. In the benefit space, only one was called out by name, and that's the financial factors rule, which, when we talked about it, it's the rule that relates to the inclusion of ESG options or, environmental, social, governance options inside ERISA plans. So we would not be surprised if that rule gets reopened or if there's a comment period on that. Additionally, his chief of staff, Klein, issued a memo to all departmental heads, which is, a typical day one memo. It essentially said, if there's ongoing rulemaking, just stop it until we've had a chance to look at it. And then if you've got rules that are going to go into effect in the next, 60 days, take whatever steps you legally can to delay those effective dates until you've had an opportunity, until the new administration has a chance to review those rules. So that order is likely to impact the new investment advice exemption. And then kind of the other, under the radar thing that happened yesterday is he also issued a number of executive orders related to the regulatory process as a whole. One of them directs the Office of Management and Budget to revise its procedures for evaluating the cost benefit of rules. We'll have to see what that does, but that could be a big deal in terms of the types of rules that can get done and how quickly they can get done. And the last thing that came out yesterday that's really relevant in the benefit space is a handful of executive orders from the Trump administration were revoked. Those rules had provided more, substantive protections for the targets of DOL investigations or of investigations generally. So it's going to force those under investigation to evaluate their strategies and possibly to pivot in ways depending on what the Biden team does from here. David, do you have any last thoughts?
Sure. No, I agree. Despite all the jokes, I agree with you, Kevin. I think I'm very curious to see how enforcement goes in the Biden administration, because clearly they're going to roll back some of the Trump administration activities. But the Department of Labor, at this point, we're waiting for formal political appointees to come in. There's a lot. I'm interested to see, will they take a more aggressive stance? Will they maintain what the Trump administration did trying to bring in a deputy assistant secretary for watching over the regional offices? That's a big question, because we joke about missing participants, but are they going to sort of try to take a more expansive view? Are we going to get more investigations? Maybe not ESG on new topics. We know cyber and privacy is lurking, our favorite topics. So we're going to have to see what happens in the next couple of months.
Well, guys, I want to say thank you so much, as always. Pleasure talking with you each and every week, and I want to wish you a wonderful rest of the weekend. Talk soon, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Well, that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. I want to thank all of our great contributors this week. Don't forget, we're back again tomorrow for BRN AM. I'll be joined by Douglas Elman's Damon Kennard. We'll be talking about the New York City real estate market. What's it look like? You're going to want to tune in, of course. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.